I think for me, writing is a way of untangling my thoughts and emotions and making greater sense of the world and all that it evokes in me. So sometimes it's very personal. It's about coping with emotional outbursts as a result of a particular situation I might find myself in, and sometimes it's just about making greater sense of the issues of the day, and what I would like to think of them as a result of making sense. I think my entire sort of this independent India history series that I'm working on with the children's imprint of Penguin India is essentially about this. It is about deconstructing the issues of the day and um, untangling and outlining them as much for myself as for for the readers of those books. And the wonderful thing about writing is that when it works, when all of these myriad thoughts that are swimming inside your mind find vent on a page in a way that the bridge is there between what you're thinking and what you're writing, it can be magical and it can be deeply uplifting. I know it brings a lot of peace to me more than most other pursuits. It's almost like meditation. And I also know on the reverse side of it that when it doesn't, it can be very very restless. And I feel very uneasy. So I think writing for me is meditation. It's about living a more meaningful life, about understanding the world and understanding my own self as a result of that a little better.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Meghaa Gupta. Meghaa is an author and festival curator. She has written books like A Home of Our Own, Unearthed, and After Midnight. She's previously worked with Tulika Publishers, the Times Group, and Singapore Press Holdings. Currently, Meghaa is pursuing her MA in Environmental Humanities from Bath Spa University. She is also the co-founder of the Green Literature Festival in India. Tune in to hear her talk about writing, publishing, green literature, children's books, and more. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. This week I have with me Meghaa Gupta. Welcome to the show, Meghaa. It is so lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. Lovely to be here. I think this is officially my first podcast recording. So I'm actually very happy that I got to do it. And yeah, I just hope I don't ramble too much. But
Oh, don't worry. It's this podcast is all about conversations and it's amazing the kind of directions these conversations take sometimes. But the very first thing I want to ask you is what is your earliest memory of being creative and when did you start writing?
so, it's funny actually. I've been writing for a fairly long time. And the way I picked up writing was that I think it must have been I was in class 10, I think. And I got a diary for the first time as a birthday gift, and it was really pretty. And I think that was also a very sort of stressful time for me. I don't know why our education system always makes these matriculation exams so hard on your system, but I was coping with a lot. And also I think it was because my father had recently been transferred very close to my 10th standard. Actually not very close, but yeah, I think about a year 2 years into it. And I started writing to cope with the outburst of emotions that I was suffering. So writing for me initially, more than a creative activity, was catharsis. Was about you know um, giving a private vent to my emotions. I mean, of course, I'm too young to just say like at 10th standard to be going to therapy because I'm coping with anxiety. And I don't think it was ever that serious, but yes, I'd like to think that I'm an emotional person, and I do sometimes have very strong emotional reactions to the world. And at that time, I was certainly coping with a lot. And so that's how writing started. The idea of taking up writing professionally actually came very late to me. I mean, um, it's interesting that I say that because um, I worked in journalism. I studied mass communication, but I always thought maybe I want to do it because I enjoy reading. I enjoy the act of reading, of assimilating ideas. Uh, I thought for the longest time that maybe I'd fit into an editor's shoes.
Hmm.
Uh, but I mean, and all this while I'm journaling. Okay, so I have never stopped journaling all my life since I first picked it up. But it just so happened that in journalism they don't make you an editor. You start off as a reporter, and I know how aggrieved I was because my first copy was put through so many rounds of editing and kind of polished and polished. This is in so my first break was actually in Singapore. I
Okay.
started working with Singapore Press Holdings as a rookie reporter. I even have a journalist, I have a small sort of um, ID card which says Meghaa Gupta, journalist, Singapore Press Holdings. And it was quite interesting because that first day I learned a lot. And then I also was part of a team that reported a story which won an award.
Okay.
SPH has these annual journalism awards. So, by the time I finished my internship, like a lot of people told me that, listen, you can write and you can write well. Uh, and maybe journalism may just be your thing. And then my father got transferred to India just as I kind of settled into a job there. And at that point of time, I hadn't really thought of staying away from my parents, not for a job for sure. And so, despite a lot of sort of pleading on their part, they told me, why don't you stay? It's okay. I was like, no, I mean, don't you want me to follow you? Like, very ulta reaction I had to it. So, I came back to India, got a job with Times of India as again, an intern. I was writing on education. And then what happened was 2008, 2009, the industry was hit by the financial crisis. And
Hmm.
journalism especially I think has been especially susceptible to these sort of phases of economic downturn
Hmm.
and hasn't ever really fully recovered. So that's when I actually made my foray into publishing. And I felt publishing was like good waters to be in. You got to read a lot of books. You could do your writing on the side without ever feeling overwhelmed by it. But I think by 2016, having sort of done that for a while, and then I was at Tulika, of course, which has been my longest stint in publishing, like almost 10 years. So, which
Yeah.
is a lot. I think it's funny because a lot of my friends have actually skipped and, joined, like hopped and skipped and shifted jobs and been in like three jobs in those 10 years. And I have been, plodding away at Tulika, which I have no regrets about. I think it was learned a lot, read a lot of children's books, and also wrote my first book,
Yeah.
Home of Our Own. And I think the fact that Radhika Menon picked it and decided to publish it um, with Tulika made me realize that, maybe I can actually think of writing. And it's strange that I never thought of writing professionally when I was in full time journalism, because full time journalism can really lead to burnout
Yeah.
and don't have the time to pause and work on your writing. But publishing has a slower pace. It allows
Hmm.
you to, explore yourself through books and then arrive at things you want to write. So I think, yeah. So for me, To answer your question, I think writing didn't start off as wanting to do it professionally. It was a realization that dawned on me through all of these years of working and, getting to know my own interests and things I like doing in life. But I'm very glad that I discovered that I could write professionally also.
Which is amazing because I've read A Home of Our Own being the first thing I read of yours. And this was, and to give context to listeners, so Megha used to be at Tulika and she was the rights manager and business development. She was managing rights and business development. And I basically took over from her when she was like going on study leave. So, in a lot of ways, Megha is like my predecessor and mentor in terms of when I was joining Tulikast. I'm still very new. But so this episode is special for so many reasons in that sense. But, coming back to the conversation and, just talking about your trajectory, right, in publishing, there are actually two things I'm really curious about. Is one, because, of course, editorial was always a part of what you were doing, but then, like I mentioned, you were kind of handling rights and business development, which is not a side. When, usually when someone says that they want to get into publishing, almost immediately the first thing people say is, I want to be an editor. That's literally like one of the most sought after positions. So I'm just curious as to how you got into rights and why you sort of chose to kind of stick in that sort of direction, which is fairly different from editorial, of course, and is more kind of like growing the books in a very different way. So that's the first thing I want to ask you. And second, of course, why, children's literature? So you can answer those questions in whichever order you'd like.
So I think I'll start with children's literature because that sort of comes before the first part of the question. Um, I have been an older sibling for a lot of my life. I mean,
Okay.
I have a younger brother, but also just a lot of younger cousins, and I have been very successful at babysitting all of them. So I have a thing with,
Okay.
and I think what has happened is in because I have been babysitting, I think since I was 10 years old, and what it does is at least in my case, it has filled me with a certain respect for children as I've grown older. Like you
Okay.
learn to approach children, especially when you start babysitting very young, right? Like having kids around you, uh, they won't respond to shouting and screaming and getting frustrated, but they will respond to a respectful tone and being firm, but sort of respecting their agency as people in their own right, which we forget. We sometimes tend to devalue childhood a lot, and I learned very early on not to do it. So it started from that. And when you start respecting children, at least for me, what I noticed was that there is a certain openness about children. They're very accepting of their vulnerability. And when they trust you, I'm just sometimes so surprised at the openness with which they discuss the issues that they're facing. And it's sometimes, as adults, it's very easy to laugh when a child comes up to you and says, I don't like eating my food in a tiffin. And then,
Okay.
you feel like, but that's you because you've forgotten that there was once a child inside you, and there should always be that child. You were once a child, and there should always be a child inside you. And we tend to forget that. And when we forget that, we start having problems accepting that we are vulnerable, which we still
Yeah.
are. So I
Yeah.
felt like, children's literature, one, it allows me to kind of keep the child alive inside me. And
Hmm.
that's something which keeps me working on these books. And the other part, of course, is I think I had always had this respect for childhood. And my first break onwards, I've somehow always got jobs with organizations that are producing literature for younger people. I mean, of all, starting from as young as 2 3 year olds to much older people, much older kids, 15, 16 plus. But I think it's good that that happen chance happened the way it did, because it sort of fed into the kind of person I am already. And I feel like it's also a good space to be in, because in India it's growing.
Yeah.
And I feel that any country that, thinks seriously about its future needs to actually base its plans around getting to needs to begin its thinking from the point where a child picks up a book and reads
Yeah.
something that shapes their ideas, because it's so well known, right, that reading and what you read in your early formative years shapes you fundamentally as a person even when you are much older.
Mm.
So it's all of these things which have encouraged me to plod on in children's literature and do the work that I'm doing here. About the first part of your question, I think that was again like I'd say a lot of my life actually isn't planned. It isn't as if I consciously got into publishing saying, "Acha, I'll get into the rights role." It's about discovering. I feel like life is a process of discovery, right? So that's the most um, I think that's when we are at our most vulnerable, but it's also the most enriching parts of when you discover yourself and you discover new
Mm.
things about your likes and dislikes as a person. And so I joined Tulika as an editor, and while you're working with translators and authors, you're looking at manuscripts. And you know how in Tulika we have a very sort of collaborative process of working on books.
Yeah.
But it so happened that shortly after I joined, the person who was actually handling this job, and it was not very big at that time. It was just if, we have a book which can be pitched to publishers abroad, or if some publisher abroad gets in touch with us to translate our books for their market or take our books to their market,
Yeah.
then to just kind of look after those. So when she left, Radhika told me that, Megha, do you want to, I'd like you to handle this. And then I started handling it. And I think I got completely sort of sucked into the process. It also happened that the volume of work began to increase a lot in this sphere.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because I think I realized that there is a certain amount of altruism that you require as an editor to,
Right.
and a certain kind of confidence as well, to look at somebody else's work and influence it with your own thoughts of how it should be.
Mm.
And I was forever tentative doing that work. I realized I was
Okay.
I always found myself slightly nervous about, like, putting my thoughts to other writers, especially because I had discovered at a point that I myself enjoy writing. And then I
Mm.
was like, am I trying to influence this person's writing by what I think makes good writing? And as
Mm.
somebody who is beginning to enjoy the writing process, does it mean that, I mean, of course there are some things which, I mean, like copy editing mistakes are things which every editor should be able to correct.
Yeah.
And but structural editing, the editing of how can this idea become uh, assume its best form,
Mm.
far more tricky.
Yeah.
And I was always tentative about being um, the ideal person to give those suggestions. Of course, I've become better at it because I've also now done it for other places. But I'm handling this youth section where I work with reviews and stuff of children's books. But that's very different kind of editing. The editing that goes into making of a book can, it leads to the making of a legacy product. And to have your imprint on it as an editor means a lot. It's a very huge responsibility, and I wasn't ever 100% sure of whether that's a responsibility I want to assume.
Mm.
Um, but this work, when it came to me, I felt that it was taking an author's, hard work,
Yeah.
their published material, and doing so much more with it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that aspect of the work, allowing a book to grow in the world and find newer places to travel to, and also kind of discovering how people in different markets want to texts. Like, the world is still so big, right? We tend to forget about it in our own insula book, and reading it and seeing how to improve it. But um, the world is really big. People have different tastes, and it's always interesting for me to explore that side. So I felt like this was a job that kind of made me realize, a, what are the kind of books people are responding to, what are
Mm,
they responding to in those books, how do you know what are the kind of books that will work in non-Indian markets,
mm,
how are publishers overseas looking at books, um, and also just testing yourself, right, in so many waters teaches you things about coping with different people and coping with different tastes. It was hugely rewarding. I'd say this job was a huge learning curve. I learned so much from it, which I probably didn't from other things that I did uh, up till that point. But it happened completely by fluke. It just so happened that Pallavi, who was handling this, she left just as I joined, and it fell upon me. And then I sort of, because the work was increasing and there were the files were, because we had such little work, I think, in the rights department that time, that even the files weren't organized a certain way. So being the very OCD person in these scenarios, I started by, oh, we should must have a file for this and file for that and file for that, and creating
yeah. Now
Excel.
there's a whole catalog of files in the rights department.
Yes, which you're handling very ably. So it's good to have another OCD person take over.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, otherwise it can get very. But it was very interesting for me when I heard that you wanted to do this work, because I think when I joined, I didn't even know that there is something like this. Very honestly, I thought publishing houses means mainly it's editors and marketing people.
Yeah.
I didn't have 100% clarity on this kind of role, especially
Mm.
because subsidiary rights. I know in academic publishing in India, it's very evolved. In some of the bigger publishers, it's very evolved, a literary rights portfolio. But in children's publishing, I think it's still fairly new. I'd
Yeah,
like to think that it's.
it is.
Um, so it was like a lot of people did tell me when I started handling that, that they were quite um like pleased that Tulika had somebody who was exclusively handling, this work. So I was pleasantly surprised by that, but it also made me more responsible towards the, work which I was doing. So I hope that answers both your questions.
Yeah, no, it does because it's fascinating because since especially why I asked that question about the rights portfolios because as I mentioned, like editorial and marketing are still very much the sought after sort of portfolios in a sense in publishing, right? You don't really look at the whole business side or production logistics side of it in a sense. And to kind of just sort of even take from the thread you said, right? Because when I applied to Tulika, I specifically wanted the rights position. That's kind of what I had applied for. And it was like my good fortune that I was able to kind of get it at a certain point. But the reason I actually went towards rights, which is very different from yours, in your case, it kind of happened by chance. For me, also, I think it was a sense of it was the experiences I had up till that point because I had some sense of editorial, and it's like you said, it's a huge responsibility to be an editor for sure. And I was doing manuscript evaluations at the time when I was working with Bound, which is something I really liked, I really enjoyed to kind of, I think, give writers a sense of the possibilities of what their manuscript could be and things they could work on. But it was still very suggestion based, and obviously, it's up to the writer after that point on how they want to do it, and then they can get a proper editor to work with them on a piece. But it is definitely there's a lot of hand holding. Like almost is like a marriage, the relationship of a writer and an editor in a sense. I feel, because there's a lot that happens, and it's very intense. I think with rights, like you rightly mentioned, it's interesting because you're really finding new homes, new avenues for the books, for the work, people have created, and stories which, you wouldn't otherwise get a chance to put out there. And I found that very exciting, and I think that's something I still find very exciting, the fact that, there are these incredible children's books coming out, and to really find avenues and homes for them. And I think that is a very exciting prospect for sure. But something else, again, just to take away from the whole rights conversation, which I thought would be a fascinating conversation for us, which an interesting conversation for us to have, because I know we've dealt with this to some degree, and there's been a lot of conversation within publishing around this, is the whole book to screen adaptation phenomenon that's been happening for a while, for years now. With a variety of books, it's been happening. I mean, even if you take, say, Little Women, that's been adapted, uh, I think what 3 times now to screen, and of course, Harry Potter and a bunch of other books, and even the latest one being Where the Crawdads Sing. So I'm just curious as to, what your take is on the whole adaptation culture that's kind of building in a sense and growing.
So I think anything that allows a book to find a wider audience is great, right?
Hmm.
I mean, even if I don't like the movie adaptation, if it tells me something about the book and if I like it enough, it might probably prompt me to go back, buy the book, and actually read the longer version of what the author has to say. So, even though I have lots of people who've come back and say, oh, this is soiling of the craft and what have you, I realize that most authors actually do want or are interested in taking their work places. And book to screen adaptations are possibly one of the best ways of increasing or expanding the reach of a book, because increasingly I find attention spans are diminishing, especially
Hmm.
I mean, actually, across the board, we tend to blame children a lot and say, oh, children have very short attention spans. But I've seen enough adults who are probably worse than children when it comes
Okay.
to attention spans. They don't, um, the whole idea of focusing has gone away. But people do, like, increasingly in the free time, in their free time. I have people who are avid readers, but who are increasingly saying that in their free time, it's about Netflixing or Prime Video. you know and it's great when books find a home in these various video platforms. About So that's my take in terms of the business of it, and also in terms of how it feeds into a book's um reach. I think I want to see more of it in the children's space,
Hmm.
especially with Indian books, because I mean, we have enough of like the Peppa Pigs and the bad guys. I mean, so many of these English children's literature that has transitioned very successfully on screen.
Yeah.
Mm, but that hasn't happened, um, so much with Indian children's books. And I think, barring the comic book, I think Chota Bheem.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't really
And
think of.
Tenali Raman, maybe.
Yeah, Tenali Rama. Yeah, correct, correct,
Yeah.
correct. So, barring these few exceptions, you haven't really had children's literature from India,
That's true. That is true.
making its way to the screen. So it's very interesting to see that happen now. I mean, people showing interest in taking Indian children's literature. Of course, it's very small, it's very
Yeah.
sporadic, but I have great hopes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. Fingers crossed, right? But yeah, because it is again, the reason why I talk about adaptations is because there's this whole conversation now also, as there's not enough content to be produced fast enough, and I think especially in a sort of screen sense, I think one of the bigger challenges, I believe, that production houses are facing is that there's not enough content, and books are actually a great source for storytelling, which is why I think you see a lot more books, like a lot more interest around books, and like this sort of acquiring stories to be adapted for the screen, which is kind of fascinating to see. But I completely agree with children's literature. I don't think you see it as much, especially in India or a South Asian context for that matter. You haven't seen something like pretty big. I think mythology wise, okay, yeah, you have characters like, say, a Chota Bheem and like a Tenali Raman. But I think to really see something come out from a book would be amazing for sure. So yeah,
I
thank you
feel
so
like
much.
people, in fact, sorry to
No, 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 no.
but I feel like I think like an easy or sort of lazy excuse that a lot of people looking for content have to say is, "Arey, but there are not so many really good books." I feel that's a very very lazy excuse.
Mm,
I'm not saying that everything that is produced by children's publishers is spectacular. There are many books which even I don't understand why they came into the world in the first place. But I feel like to say that, oh, there isn't just enough of good children's literature is coming out of the mouth of somebody who's incredibly lazy and hasn't bothered to look. And it's
that's true.
amazing, the kind of things you can find in the world when you actually just look. Because there's a very interesting anecdote of how David Godwin found Arundhati Roy because he bothered to look. And then she went and won the Booker Prize. And
Yeah,
David Godwin is a British agent. He's one of the best. I mean, I think most Booker winners, big winners, are
from DJ.
British. Yes, from DJ. And a lot of the best Indian writers are with him because he bothered to look. So, I feel like dismissing something without even bothering to look is a sign of being untrue to your work and to your craft, and to not realize that there may be some splendor waiting for you if you just looked.
Yeah. No, for sure. But yeah, just hoping we see more Indian stories, right, on screen, or in whatever mediums. Really, I think just and because there's a lot of like good stories, actually South Asian stories for that matter. In fact, I just want to quickly mention this one series I saw recently called Angan, which is a Pakistani show which is based on a book by the same name. It's from an Urdu novel. The English translation is The Women's Courtyard. It's by Khadija Mastoor, and and I watched the show online, and I realized that it was based from a book. So then, now I've gotten the book to read it to see, the kind of work she's done. So it's interesting how content can also just inspire you to go back to the original source of where an adaptation has come from as well, which I think is great for storytelling, right? And I think for publishers, that's amazing. I mean, the more places your books are reaching, the better for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. But, coming back again to sort of, I guess, the basics and the origins of Megha the writer, I think one of the things I want to ask is, who are, writers or artists or creators who've basically inspired you, or, whose works have really stayed with you and sort of influenced you in a way? Because I think everyone, while growing up, you obviously have these certain stories that do kind of stay with you. And like you said, it kind of helps shape your fundamental perspective on things, right? So, who are those writers for you?
So obviously, when you grow up and there are all the children's books that you read, and I mean, I have realized something that more than writers, it's the works I'm responding to. So I think
Hmm.
I'd want to focus on the works,
Yeah.
because also, as one of my friends said, no, one of the uh, publishing can really break your notions about writers sometimes,
Yeah.
because
True.
when you are reading a book by a certain someone, and it's very interesting because I have friends in journalism and they say, that that never happens with bylines. I said, because they are so sort of ephemeral in nature, they're so temporary. But books are legacy products. So when people hit upon a book and they really like it, at the end of those 200, 300 pages, there is almost like a relationship that develops with the writer of this text. And
Yeah.
you imagine this person to be a certain way because they've written something like this, which is on your bookshelf, it is in your home, or it is in your mind. And when you meet that person, and the chances are higher if you work in publishing sometimes or interested in publishing, you go to a literary festival, you meet the person, and that completely shatters any illusion you had about the person being a certain way. So I shall not get into examples of that. So uh, more than I think, more than people, I say it's the works that have, and sometimes it's a very happy sort of meeting of minds.
Yeah.
I should say that it's always unpleasant, but I've had my fair share of unpleasant experiences where the person has just not lived up to my. And I think it's unfair on them that I have painted this portrait
This
of them
picture, yeah.
a certain way because of what they've written, and they just completely fail to match up to my illusory image of them. But yeah, very often they've actually bypassed and more than meted my expectations, which is also lovely. But the works that I feel have influenced me very deeply are the um, ones that, I mean, I don't know for whatever reason, but I think it's because when I was a child, I was reading a lot of short stories, and
Hmm.
they stayed with me. But there was a collection of Indian folk tales that was published by the Children's Book Trust,
Okay.
and that used to be it was a really thick, fat yellow book. And my memory of that is it had so many stories. I have read them myself, savored them, but I've also, used it to put my brother and then other younger siblings to sleep.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
it used to be like the bedtime stories of yeah, in the household. And I really that was one book I liked. And of course, there's a whole lot of writers which people keep quoting: the Harry Potters, the Roald Dahls, the Ruskin Bonds, Subhadra Sen Gupta, mm, Paro Anand works. But maybe it's because I have short term memory. I don't know, whatever is the problem. But the works I could think of as I was thinking about your question, one, of course, is Ramchandra Guha's India After Gandhi,
Hmm.
published in 2007. uh, the first magisterial book on post colonial India.
Yeah.
And I think it influenced me so deeply that it has actually led me to create an entire series of books on independent India for the young people's imprint of Penguin India, which is Puffin.
Yeah.
And it's been so eye opening because the book has, what I have so far, I haven't read the latest edition of the book. But what I really liked about India After Gandhi is that, unlike a lot of people who find it very easy to troll
Yeah.
post colonial India for all of its failures, it takes a very sort of mature, it does a very, it has a very mature handling of the subject, and which would be expected of a writer like Ramchandra Guha. Mm, It shows you that there is darkness, but it
Hmm.
doesn't completely eliminate the possibility of light. And it doesn't sound like a rant at the end of the book that, oh, this is wrong and that is wrong. You realize that the post colonial world was born in such dark times
Yeah.
and was so vulnerable that we probably need to be more, um, you know, we need to allow for its failures. I'm not saying
Hmm.
we shouldn't criticize it, but the criticism shouldn't come off sounding like, mm, a complete devaluation of this world that was born in a way most horrific situation. um, the use of nuclear power,
Yeah.
which had completely annihilated the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also just filled such very real fear into the minds of countries around the world. What if this bomb is dropped on us? And here you have these very vulnerable countries gaining independence at this point of time, who don't even have electricity, forget about technology, who cannot aspire to, the fear of being born into that world is something which, the more I think about it, the more I realize what an arduous task it was to build a nation at that point.
Yeah.
So I think Ramchandra Guha's book gave me amazing insight into the ways of looking at post-colonial, um, the post-colonial world, and I'm so grateful, really grateful to him. Also because I badgered him. Sometimes if I really respond to a book, I tend to write to the writers to ask my questions, and they don't have any sort of impetus to respond to those. But he has
Oh,
responded
wow.
to most of my emails over the years. I have badgered him with many emails, and he has bothered to respond to them, and it just goes to show the quality of person you're dealing with,
Mm,
right? But
yeah.
I really respect that quality when I see it in people, where not
Mm.
everything is got to do with influence and social entanglement. Um, the other writer is, of course, Khalil Gibran, or Gibran. I don't know how it's, because it's a proper noun. You keep struggling with what
That
pronunciation.
is true.
But oh, the writing, the prophet. I remember I read it and I reread it. It's the one book that I've gone back to every time I find myself unsettled, by the cares of the
Mm,
world. Just things like, in the dew of small things, the heart finds its morning and is refreshed. What kind of person would he be to be, able to imagine these things and to see the joy in the small, which we forget so easily in the world that we inhabit.
yeah.
Um, then um, I have recently been reading Catherine Rundle's books for adults. There's an
Okay.
essay she wrote on why children's literature should matter to
Okay.
adults, and it's been
Okay.
published in a book, which I can never imagine that happening in India because our market is so sort of unevolved in the children's space. But I read that book, what a joy it is. Act two, it gives full vent to everything that I ever thought
Hmm.
about children and their place in their world, and the ways in which they think. There's a line where she says that children's literature is for people who have no vote, no power, no
Yeah.
money, who navigate the world in their own knowledge of their vulnerability.
Hmm.
And it's so true. And it's strange that, because she does say that, and sometimes adults suffer the same vulnerability even though they are so old and wise, supposedly. So
Yeah.
and then it's her John Donne biography. Now, I'm not a student of literature. I don't make any, I don't make any disclaimers on knowing the full extent of the masters of English literature. But the way she has written John Donne's biography
Hmm.
is, I think it's an education in how to write a biography. It's just so brilliantly written. It's called Super Infinite.
Okay.
Um, Also, an author whom I discovered very much by chance was Karan Mahajan,
Okay.
um, which is very interesting actually. So, what happened was that I'm a prude, Sangeeta,
Okay.
and there's this one book. It's the first book that Karan wrote. Yeah, family planning. I swear.
Okay.
So his first book was family planning, and it has such a hilarious premise. It's set in
Okay.
Delhi, and it's
Okay.
set in the house of the Minister of Urban Planning. And it so happens that one of my uncles is a specialist in urban planning, and he's a favorite uncle sorts. So I and this man has a fetish for um pregnant women, which is why he
Okay.
keeps getting his wife pregnant, and they have like an army of children. And I was just so bewildered that somebody's imagination can be so bold. And the funny thing is, like minister of urban planning, of everything. And it's it's very, it is so bizarre because this this man has taken over as the minister, and he's like the highway man, building these highways. And Delhi, as you know, is a city of highways. There are so many highways that have come up in Delhi post in the 1990s. My own parents talk of the urban development of Delhi. So in a very strange way, it talks of uncontrolled development both in his personal life and his professional life. I was, for a prude, it was quite a read. It was bold and racy, and uh, sounded like a real Dilli wala novel. So, and again, I was like, yaar, ye to, matlab, this is something really, something very different. And then I googled the author because, I mean, Karan is a fairly well-known author, but not in the sort of, you wouldn't think of him in the same way you'd think of, let's say, an Arundhati Roy, right? So it's
Yeah.
just that I came across the novel. I was quite stuck, struck by strangeness and its hilarity. And turns out that, it's a very interesting story
Hmm.
about being very much a like a Delhi boy growing up. And he had this, that obviously there are interviews with writers, and he had this very interesting snippet to share on how he and his younger brother were cricket aficionados, and both of them ended up getting recruited as teenagers to be the cricket India cricket editors or writers by this international platform, and they started getting paid £200. And the platform eventually realized it's actually kids, and teenage boys in Delhi who are just smitten by everything to do with cricket, who've kind of. So it was, I read this book without any idea of who this man is. The next thing I know is that I've gotten in touch with him, and I'm requesting that story of his about computers, and how they had this impact on young Indians in my
Okay.
book, After Midnight. Uh, and again, I was quite, uh, yeah, delighted to find somebody who is willing to indulge my strange request. But yeah, and so it was both his novels, even the second one, The Association of Small Bombs, very sort of very situated in the Delhi that I grew up in. And that's because when I spoke to him, I realized that both of us are fairly close in age. He's a little older, but grew up in similar neighborhoods and so on and so forth. So that's why, you just sometimes discover, the process of discovery is amazing, Sangeeta. In
Yeah.
books, sometimes the things that you discover are just so enlightening, and they make life all the more worth living sometimes.
No, that is very true because like I think it's amazing sometimes the things books can just make you introspect and think about and realize. I think the last book that did that for me was a book I read in December. It was called The Lady and the Monk by Pico Iyer, and I haven't read any of his other books. So that was the first book of his that I read, and it was completely by chance. So one of the senior editors at Tulika had actually given the book, had lent the book to another colleague, and I think she couldn't get to it. So I said, "Oh, can I, give it a read and just see?" And somehow I just took to it. And I was like, oh my God, I want to finish reading this. And so I borrowed it. I read the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, I love this man's writing and the way he sort of introspects and talks about life. And it's his observation about Japan as a country and a culture. And at the same time, he talks about how he meets his wife, while he's in Japan. So it's so interesting to just see how a writer can really make you introspect about your own life and surroundings in a way, which is what I think Pico Ayer's book did for me, honestly. So yeah, I completely agree. The way I think a book can make you look at things is just so phenomenal sometimes. It can really change your perspective on things. Uh,
Yeah, and in fact, a lot of people do ask me, but isn't that true of all art? I said, probably it's true of all art. It is wanting you to introspect about life in certain ways, but I think they all do it in different ways. And
Yeah.
what is so enriching about reading, the whole reading world, the reading life, is that when you read a book, for those whatever hours you invest in, that's like transporting yourself into a different world in its pages, and it is allowing you to imagine. I feel it is probably a bit more laborious for the reader as compared to you're probably just watching a movie on the book, or
Mm.
it's just you switch it on that 2 hours you are watching it, and then you're done. It's far more laborious to actually open the book, go over all of those pages. It'll probably take you a few days, if not a few weeks, depending on your reading speed and availability of time.
Yeah.
But it needs that investment, and I feel the fact that you invest that much time, resources, you invest your
Yeah.
imagination in the book, makes the reading life so much richer. And I'm it upsets me that we are losing that sometimes
Yeah.
in not encouraging or losing touch with reading in the middle of everything else that we do.
Yeah, that is very true. Here's hoping to build a better reading culture with younger readers today for sure. But, slightly moving into another trajectory, you're also, like you mentioned, you are writing a series with Puffin Books, which is essentially on modern history and India, right? And one of the books you did write was about India's environmental history. And I know green literature is something you're very passionate about. There's also the Green Literature Fest, which you are a part of, which we will get to. But before that, what I do want to ask you is, how did you kind of get your interest in green literature and sort of, I guess, the whole angle of environmentalism in, writing today?
Mm. So again, it's strange, but it came from the reading. So I read Ramachandra Guha's India After Gandhi. Shortly
Yeah.
after that, for some strange reason, I read Sainath's Everybody Loves a Good Route,
Mm.
followed again by Ramchandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil's This Fissured Land. I do tend to read a fair bit of non-fiction. Um, and reading these books, made me think like I'm actually more than modern history, because modern history, many people do include the British period as well.
Yeah.
But mine is more post colonial history, it's more contemporary in that sense. And I felt that apart from politics, a lot of, I think human life is fundamentally shaped by the natural world. And
Mm.
we don't, the availability of fresh air, water, food, it's all coming from the environment. And I think a lot of the initial reading left me with that thought about how fundamentally the natural world is shaping us, and how we don't always give cognizance to that. I don't know why I think like that. That is probably something I have no explanation for. Like, why is it that I'm drawing these conclusions from what I am reading? But that's what and also it so happened that I used to like write freelance articles. So I was commissioned by the education supplement of the Hindu to write this article on green careers,
Mm.
close to, I think, World Environment Day or something like that. I'm not very sure, but yeah, I had to do an article. And then I went and I spoke to a couple of people, and it was very interesting the kind of work that was being done, because these are not mainstream careers in any case.
Yeah.
Somebody who's looking at the intersection of economics and environment, and this is, I'm talking of 2014 maybe. I mean, it just seems just yesterday, but it's like more than like so many. We are almost in another year or so. Yeah, we'll have a decade since 2014. But I wrote that, and then I got the opportunity to put across. Somebody from Terry actually had
Oh,
read that. She got in touch
okay.
with me saying, "Are you interested in writing a book which kind of is a compilation of careers in environment?" And I was like,
Okay.
"Yeah, great, yeah." I mean, it's not really a book. It's not really a book in that sense. It's more like a primer, in careers. So it's more like a,
Right.
yeah, uh, guidebook in that sense. But I was just happy that somebody had noticed something I'd written and gotten in touch with me. And so I put together that book for Terry. It was entirely commissioned. And 2016 or 15, it came out. Uh, and I think in putting together that book, it sort of further strengthened my interest in environmentalism, because I realized, I mean, earlier it was just a thought, but the more I spoke to people in making that book, people who have devoted their lives to careers in this field, I realized it's a very interesting idea and not getting explored enough.
Hmm.
And in all of these conversations, I realized that, there is such a strong historical aspect to a lot of our, um, there's a very strong environmental aspect to a lot of our history. Mm,
Okay.
Even the nuclear bombing, for instance, had a very strong environmental sort of dimension to it. And then obviously there's a Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in
Yeah.
India, which is considered a sort of landmark event in shaping the country's ideas on environmentalism.
Yeah.
But I realized that there is so much more. We had an environmental law, the Wildlife Act in 1972, Project Tiger, Project Elephant. A lot has happened in India's in history related to the environment, which I wasn't sure was getting written enough for children, especially.
Right.
So basically, that's how the first book happened, the
Okay.
environmental history of uh, independent India. Um, I'm very glad that, you know, uh, the book happened, and it's because nothing of that sort was being written or had been written for children. I think the book's um, done decently in taking the subject to a lot of people, and on and off I'll get some message on my social media to say that, oh, somebody read the book, and it told them of a very different history of independent India, which they quite liked. And I know there are fabulous books on environmental history for adults, but I'm so glad that I got to write this for young people. And I know it now. When I read it, there are it always happens with me. I'll write the book, and then I look back at it and I'll be like, I could have written this slightly better, written that slightly better, and what have you. But it's out there for whatever it is worth. And the fact that it is allowing somebody to learn something which they didn't have any idea of before they read the book
Hmm.
is very satisfying for me. But I think that book is what opened the doors to a lot of my other projects, I'd like to call them,
Okay.
in this field, whether it was the Green Literature Festival or the other environment related things. But I'd like to say that I still want to be seen as somebody who's interested in children's literature, with a
Right.
special interest in environmental literature for children, but not like an exclusive interest in that.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair. But even talking about GLF, which is the Green Lit Fest, which is about green literature, and it's fascinating that it's the first festival in India, and I think possibly the only festival in India which kind of focuses on green literature. How did you because you are a co-founder, so how did you get involved with it, and what has the process been like, just in terms of building this festival? And you had your first on-site event in 2022, so what was that like? What's that journey been like for you?
Um, so again, what happened was that I'd written Unearthed, an environmental history of independent India. It landed up on the desk of Benedict Parmanand, who runs this website called Sustainability Next, which is a
Hmm.
facilitator for GLF. So
Okay.
at that point, he read the book. He quite liked it. He wrote a review for it. He got in touch with me. He was doing the Bangalore Business Literature Festival. He does that as well for the last couple of years. He's been doing it. And he said, I am interested in starting a festival for green literature, because his
Okay.
interest is, these niche, very issue based literary festivals. And I was like, yeah, hey, cool. I mean, that sounds pretty interesting. Um, And a lot of the times when people discuss their ideas with you, you said, ah, theek hai, abhi to it's in the idea phase. When it develops, it'll develop.
Yeah.
But it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I think he was very convinced about the idea. So it did happen, and he said, Acha, chalo, you become my co founder. I said, yeah, but I'm actually very interested in the children's space. He said, yeah, fine, great. Um, because his deal was to have a literature festival that encompasses all kinds of green writing and not just books for
Hmm.
adults, but also, business books and books for children, which tend to get sidelined in a lot of mainstream literature festivals. So, yeah, that's how it happened. That's how the Green Literature Festival happened. And it's been interesting, yeah, Sangeeta. I mean, the whole festival circuit is very interesting. It pushes you in a
Hmm.
different way. I
Okay.
enjoy, I think what I've really enjoyed is the curation. And
Hmm.
also the opportunity to look at so many books because every year there is an award, and not just books for children, but because I read a lot of books for adults in this space. So inevitably I'm also kind of, whoever is doing the general fiction non-fiction list also, I'd like love in those discussions that we have on books. um so that's something which I've really enjoyed. But it's also very stressful. I know the first offline festival was very stressful because we all have very different ways of working. Like Benedict is very chill, and I am very high strung. Like I need to have everything in place.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly like, I'd say the festival had a amazing turnout, which is like such a good thing to have happened.
Yeah.
But it was also quite stressful. Just all the pre-planning and then things not working out or going to plan on day, on the day. All of that happened. But all's well that ends well, I suppose. So we've had our takeaways and are hoping for an even better edition this year.
Yeah, fingers crossed for that because I heard JLF went really well in 2022. And there were some amazing books also that got featured on the list. So it's really exciting to see this space grow. So, yeah, more power to both of you for that. But also, you have designed a course on nature writing for children at the Azim Premji University. You also have conducted workshops, and you've been a speaker at various events and the like. Is teaching an avenue you're passionate about and see yourself doing more of? And how did you really get into teaching, if that's something I can talk about?
I don't know. I mean, I, it's very strange, but uh, more than a teacher, I actually see myself as an enabler.
Okay.
Like, I'm not actively teaching, it's not like I'm actively teaching the people in the course on how to become better nature writers. I think that is something which people have to figure out on their own. But this is about opening up an avenue that gives you feedback on your writing, which for all that happens in the world. I mean, it's so strange, right? That a lot of writers don't even get very solid professional feedback on the
Right.
work they
Yeah.
do. So these are platforms that enable writers to A, meet other writers, and B, get professional feedback on their work, and C, also get an opportunity to interact with people who have worked in publishing, who have established themselves as editors or publishers. And so it's about creating those opportunities for writers more than anything else, because not enough of that is happening. And I feel that when that doesn't happen, what happens is the industry as a whole somewhere suffers for it. I feel like
Hmm.
growth has to be collaborative rather than competitive.
Right.
Like, so a lot of the initiatives that I have been part of are essentially stemming from my desire to have collaborative growth, because at the end of the day it will benefit. If everybody grows, I think I too will grow. I mean,
Hmm.
it's about looking at the world in a way where you're not just thinking of your writing, but you're also thinking of the ecosystem within which your writing exists.
Hmm.
And I feel like if I've been given, and the opportunities for doing this have actually come very sort of organically. Like my book led to my participation in GLF, and my participation in GLF led to Azim Premji actually approaching me to do something like this.
Hmm.
So it's all grown very interestingly out of the writing and the reading.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, but it's just fascinating to see you work on so many different things, right? Within the sort of writing space and publishing space, really. They're all interconnected, but they're all so different in their own ways as well, which I think is really cool. Um, but also, you're currently a student now. You're back to academia, if I may. You're pursuing your MA in environmental humanities. How did you kind of make that call to go back to being a student, especially after having, worked for so many years?
yeah, I know. I feel like a bit of a dinosaur in the classroom. I think no, but I'm just kidding. I think I tend to be very ageist when it comes to myself. It's not nice. But um, I think I was doing so much in the green space that there was an urge to actually learn more.
Hmm.
And because I realized that after a point, you need to pause and look at it, from a learning space rather than a doing space.
Okay.
So, and I realized that there is a course like Environmental Humanities, which offers such an overarching view of, and at this particular university, it is located within the School of Writing and Publishing.
Hmm.
Unlike a school that is dedicated to the humanities, here it's called the School of Writing, Publishing, and the Humanities. So it's very sort of this was the first MA in environmental humanities in the UK, and this school has a pretty good reputation for its creative writing programs. And because the School of Humanities is located within the School of Writing and Publishing, one can choose to take modules that sort of intersect at some level. So I felt
Hmm.
like it fit into my interests very well. And
Hmm.
also, I think 2020 and 2021 were very, you know, very busy and also emotionally draining years because a lot was happening with me personally. I wouldn't want to get into details of that here.
Yeah.
Also, professionally, a lot was happening in terms of my work at Tulika, but also just in terms of my own writing. Like Unearthed came out in August 2020, and then After Midnight came out in August 2022. And apart from writing the books, also all the work on GLF, curating the online conversations and the other conversations, reviewing the books. I started like um, curating this section on books for young people on the environment for Benedict's platform sustainabilitynext.in. So finding people to write those reviews and polishing those up for publication. A lot was happening. GLF happened, Sustainability Next happened, Razim Premji happened. It's you feel after a point that you're running on a treadmill and you need to pause.
Yeah.
Like you need a
Fair.
pause. Um, and yeah, I mean, I didn't really have a master's like this, so I thought that maybe this is a good time to come and pursue studies. And I think it's great when you return to studies after having lived so much of life. I mean, I'm in my mid 30s now, and I find that all that experience no makes gives you a certain clarity about life, and allows you to make the most of the opportunities that you get. I think
Hmm.
it makes you resourceful, and
Right.
it makes you clear in your head. I mean, at least in
Hmm.
my case, that's how it has been. And I find that I'm actually being able to take a lot more out of my education than I did when I studied as a younger person. So it's been very meaningful. So I'm actually very glad that despite all the demons haunting me, I chose to take the plunge.
And more power to you for doing so as well. And on that note, we are now coming towards the end of this interview, and we always end with these last two questions. So the first one is, what are your aspirations? These can be creative, personal, professional, basically anything, the things you're looking forward to in the near or even distant future.
So, something I'm actually very excited about. I have to make a formal, probably, announcement if this will happen soon in February sometime. But I'm doing a literary exchange that I'm facilitating through GLF between the
Hmm.
universities of Badspa and Ashoka in India. So
Oh, wow.
students are looking at the ways in which writers, like the students in at Badspa, are looking at books written by Indian writers, and the students in India are looking at books written by British writers. But all these books are thematically linked. They are books for young
Okay.
people written on various environmental themes, and it's an exchange that GLF is going to have online, where the students will be, sharing their thoughts on how these writers have approached thematically related books.
Hmm.
How they've written about uh, maybe children setting off on an adventure to protect their natural world, or books that have cat protagonists, that have a girl and an elephant. So it's very interesting, picking those books, curating those books, having the students read them, and obviously the authors will be involved as well. So it's very interesting because it's again helping me to take these books to different geographies and do more with them. I feel like building bridges is something I really enjoy, and
Hmm.
I think it's also very deeply enriching. So, yeah, so that's something in the immediate future that I am looking forward to. Also, just like doing my course, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting because you get to do a creative project in this course.
Okay.
You can choose to do a creative project instead of a regular MA dissertation. So I have chosen to do a creative project, develop a children's book, probably as my creative project. So looking forward to that in the immediate future. Long term, yeah, I mean, I think long term life will figure itself out. For now, I have enough on my plate to get.
No, no, but more power to you and all the amazing things that you are doing. I'm excited to see what you come out with next, and especially all the books you have in store. Huge fan of A Home of Our Own, which is this lovely children's book you had written with Tulika. Again, highly recommend that to anyone who's listening. Also, last question. What is a piece of advice or learning you'd like to share with people? Again, this can be something personal or professional or creative, basically, something you've sort of experienced for yourself and wish more people were aware of.
I I think people might be aware of this, but I feel like writing is such a solitary. A lot of the things that we do as writers, uh, as creative people, can be extremely solitary in nature, where you are working by yourself. And I think somewhere, I feel like you are so immersed in your own work that you kind of lose touch with the wider world of that creative art form.
Hmm.
And I feel like in doing that, sometimes you lose touch with sources of inspiration.
Hmm.
Also, it's very easy to, after a point, only think about yourself and your work, whereas, and not allow yourself the vulnerability to go out in the world and discover that, actually you and your work are a very tiny, insignificant part of the universe.
Hmm.
That vulnerability, it becomes so hard to accept, you know, um, one's own insignificance in the
Yeah.
wider world sometimes. So But I feel like allowing yourself vulnerability, allowing yourself to step out in the world, and realizing that you are um, more than just what you do, and there is so much of wonder in the world, and so many things to discover and to grow with, to make life more meaningful, to self actualize.
Yeah.
I think that's very important for any person, whether they have a creative life at all or not.
Hmm.
I feel like it becomes more so you know um, with writers, um, to swim in the ocean of uncertainty and vulnerability, and to emerge out of it, to learn to swim in that is just so it's so life changing. More than just a good writer, you actually emerge as a great person, I feel. And that's that I think is a great way to be. And yeah, I mean, sorry, this sounds all very saintly and preachy, but I think for me, it has really been about facing my fears. I think the writing life has been about um, fighting a daily dose of self doubt. Am I good enough? Am I right? I mean, I write something, I see it on the page that there is need for improvement. But what is increasingly happening is, instead of completely deflating at the thought of something not being to power, or something being very lackluster, to recognizing that there is a grain of an idea inside it which can become something truly wonderful. uh, that's the journey.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's about growing yourself. That's most important. Everything else will follow. It's like writing can never be the end all, the destination. It can be a means to a more meaningful life. One needs to have passions which behove you to write. You can't be like, my aim in life is to write books. Your aim should be to witness, all the glories and tragedies of living, and to then make more sense of it through the writing.
Yeah. And on that enlightening note, we have now come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for being here, Megha. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I had so much fun. I hope this was good for you as well.
No, I think this is really nice. I really enjoyed myself. I think it was a very long one. I wonder if people will actually listen to the end, right to the end of it. But yeah, I had lots of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So that was my conversation with Megha Gupta. I really enjoyed talking to her about publishing, children's literature, and so much more. Closing this episode with excerpts from Megha's book After Midnight, narrated by her. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next week with a new guest and a new chronicle to share. Talk soon!
Smartphones. In July 1995, Jyoti Basu, the Chief Minister of West Bengal, made the first mobile call in India. From his office in Calcutta, he called and spoke to Sukram, the communications minister based in Delhi. The device Basu used was a boxy little Nokia phone, and the network was primitive. Yet the call marked the beginning of a service that connected India in a way landlines never could. Like most new technologies, in its initial years, the mobile phone was an expensive proposition, beyond the reach of most Indians. The handset was priced at over 20,000 rupees, and call charges were over 8 rupees per minute. But as more and more Indians discovered the convenience of carrying phones with them and remaining in constant touch instead of relying on fixed landlines, mobile phones started getting popular. New phone models became available in the market, costs began to fall, features began to improve, and networks began to increase. By 2004, the number of mobile phone connections had overtaken landlines. A decade later, internet enabled advanced mobile phones, or smartphones, had put more computing power into the hands of average Indians than the most powerful computers that existed in India's laboratories during the 60s and the 70s. For most Indians, the smartphone was not just their first computer, it was also their first music player, TV, and camera, technologies they hadn't been able to afford earlier. It brought a world of internet enabled knowledge and services into their hands. The internet, that was originally made in English, had found one of its largest audiences among multilingual mobile phone users in India, so its content was made available in various Indian languages such as Hindi, Tamil, and Bengali. Things went one step further with a voice activation feature that allowed people who could neither read nor type to command their phone by simply speaking to it. Today, about 60 crore Indians own a smartphone, and India has the highest rates of internet consumption on mobile phones. I have also written about electricity in my book After Midnight, A History of Independent India. And actually, we forget how transformative electricity has been. So, this excerpt actually talks about that. The pursuit of electrification in the years since independence has been deeply transformative. Lighting has helped reduce household fires caused by oil lamps. Children are able to study after dark, and education levels have improved. People can continue working till late and increase their income. Crime rates have fallen, and it has become safer to venture outside after dark. Despite this, many households continue to remain without electricity. They are neither connected to the grid nor do they have access to any local sources of electricity. This is not always because of insufficient generation or inadequate transmission. Very often, the distribution of electricity is also impacted by social divides. Richer neighborhoods in cities and wealthier households in villages almost inevitably have greater access to electricity because they are able to pay for it, and it is presumed that they need it more because they have the money to afford technology that runs on electricity. This is truly unfortunate because electricity usage is a cornerstone of modern development. Until every last household in the country has access to affordable electricity, irrespective of its geographical location or social standing, India's quest to become a global superpower will remain incomplete. Finally, I had to think about what I want to leave my young readers with at the end of the book, and I'm reading the last bit from After Midnight. India has come a long way since independence and carved an important place for itself in the world. Yet the experiences of the pandemic years bear many lessons on development. To become a global superpower, India needs to not only grow its economy but also improve its record in meeting basic human requirements such as education and healthcare, and find ways of developing without harming the natural environment excessively. All this may seem difficult, but it is essential to build a better future. Most of all, India needs to think about its children, who have possibly suffered the most during the pandemic years. Although COVID 19 has largely spared children, it has taken away a great deal of attention from their needs. Job losses pushed crores of families into poverty. Children in these families lost access to sufficient and nutritious food and education. Lakhs of children missed routine immunization against diseases like measles and polio because the healthcare system was overwhelmed by the pandemic. The lockdown confined many of them to deeply oppressive home environments where they were deprived of basic needs and even suffered abuse. The children of today are a mirror to the future. India must look long and hard at them. In the years since independence, it has produced several miracles in fields like space, technology, and medicine. Yet its greatest miracle may lie in how it saves its children from the darkness of the pandemic years and other perils and leads them towards a sunlit future. No nation is perfect. It is usually a work in progress. India certainly is. Its progress, especially since the economic changes of 1991, has invited much praise as well as criticism. The pandemic has been one of the greatest challenges to India's progress in the years since independence. For many people, it has been easy to lose hope in this nation. After all, there are so many things that are wrong with it. The history of independent India has many accounts of its failures. However, these should not take away from its hard won successes. While hopelessness might seem easy, the story of this nation has been built on hope, the ability of its greatest leaders and countless people to rise above the problems surrounding them, to persist, protest, and prevail.